This is your last chance. After this...
Or should we not follow the advice of the galactically stupid?
That is a nice boulder.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
Ladies and gentlemen, coming to you pre-recorded from two undersized apartments in New York City, it's Revenge of the Film Nerds.
There, we're in a tight spot.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
With your hosts, Black Crystal.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
And Jack Manley.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
A podcast for nerds by nerds.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Failure is not an option.
And now, here are your hosts, Black Crystal and Jack Manley.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Revenge of the Film Nerds. I'm your host, BK, Black Crystal, and join with me is my awesome co-host, Jack. Hello, say hi.
Hi, BK. You find me at the bottom of a rabbit hole.
Have I dug you out after our amazing deep dive into the movie we are talking about today?
I think that's why I'm in the hole in the first place, to be honest. Welcome, folks. Hi, it's good to have you back on Film Nerds. I have been doing research for this week's film, and we did a watch party for it last night, which was wonderful. Had a great time, but since that watch party, I've been researching, and I'll be honest, BK, this week's film, I was, curious about having it on the schedule when we started the season. Now that I've done the research, I don't know why this wasn't like the first film we talked about on the podcast, period.
I'm glad you bring it up. So we are talking about today the amazing film Total Recall 1990. I'm so excited to be finally talking about this. And you're right, this film is perfect for us. Not alone it being the genre that it is, which is a sci-fi action film, which we both love. The things that it took to create this impeccable species that is this film is quite literally insane. And we are going to take you on a journey today for this episode.
I mean, it's fair to say that Total Recall was the culmination of and totally embodied the action film of the 1980s going into the 1990s. And the forces that brought it together were quite simply the entire zeitgeist of action filmmaking to that point. I'm sure little do Messrs. Paul Verhoeven, Dan Schuss, Dan O'Bannon, and Gary Goldman know, but this could be something as a production. You could write a 600-page book on this film. I don't know where to start today.
Well, I think we actually have to bring it back a little because what you said something was really, really important to me. And as someone who is a 90s baby, I feel like I kind of missed this era of film in its totality because the 90s action films are quite literally some of the most violent and absurd violence I think we really see in our American filmmaking. And I kind of want to know why before we get into explaining how we can get an amazing film that is Total Recall.
That's a really good place to put it because stylistically, violence in film has always been a flashpoint, certainly in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. In those cultural expressions, violence has been a very important tool. It has been gratuitously misused, and it has also been used in very intelligent ways to make a larger cultural point. And where that really traces back to in terms of visual depictions of violence, we have to go, BK, all the way back to the start of the New Hollywood movement in 1967.
Okay, I didn't know we was going that far back. Explain.
Well, one of the two films that is largely credited with launching the New Hollywood movement is 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, directed by Arthur Penn.
Oh, you're right. Okay.
It wasn't so much the subject matter of that film that was considered gratuitous. It was a very subversive portrait of Bonnie and Clyde, but what people remembered from that film was the hyper-violent climax. And, I mean, if you don't know the story of Bonnie and Clyde, the death of Bonnie and Clyde was depicted in the film in such a graphic way that people had never really seen on screen before. And it left audiences not only stunned, but clamoring to get into the theaters to see it.
Wow. I mean, I guess if you think about it, like, things weren't really like that. I mean, like, someone who was born in the contemporary time period, I don't know what you call this, the 21st century, violence is kind of all around us, even when we were growing up. But like back then, I feel like it wasn't as mainstream. Is it weird to say that?
No, I don't think it's unfair to say that. I think at this time we were really seeing violence impact film for the first time in a really strong way. I mean, we looked at Psycho on this podcast before, and Psycho is a very, intellectually violent film, but you don't see the violence on screen. The suggestion of actual gore was not something that was okay in film, even 7 years before Bonnie and Clyde. But after Bonnie and Clyde came out, the pressure kept ratcheting up. The next and most important, arguably, moment in the creation of violence in film was the Sam Peckinpah Western in 1969, The Wild Bunch, which was, at the time, it was quoted as being a film that depicted cruel men surviving by any means. And that was something thematically that had not really been explored at a very strong level. You had sort of seen it hinted at in character performances like John Wayne's role in The Searchers. However, at this point in time, you hadn't seen the actual acts of cruelty and violence depicted with the banality of just having to survive. And that was what Peckinpah did that scarred people when this film came out. And I mean scarred a generation when it came out. Because the violence was at such a level that it actively, it drove people from theaters in disgust.
That's wild. Like, I can't imagine that. I mean, like, I don't know. I feel like we put up with so much nowadays. Like, to be at a place where, like, that actually happened is true, because films like these action films where violence became so grandiose, and I'm talking like explosions, blatant deaths, like headshots, like you're seeing people die on the screen. Like, it was in your face. Like, the only thing you could do was walk out, because it would be every beat, at least in my head and in my experience with some of the films I've seen. It feels that way.
Well, not only that, but violence kind of diverged into both the gratuitous school and the satirical school at this point. I mean, during the 1970s, for example, you had films like Dirty Harry and Death Wish that fetishized violence as a retributive act. It was about, one man, one gun, going out and taking out the bad guys in, violent, bloody shootouts by any means necessary. But at the same time, you had other traditions popping up. In 1971, Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange satirized brilliantly the way that our culture fetishizes violence. In 1974, Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out and became the first true slasher. In 1977, the splatter genre of horror, which is just known for bucket after bucket of blood, had arguably its highest cultural watermark with the film Suspiria. And at this point, you started getting into the 80s, violence was ubiquitous, and it came in many forms in film, but because of the kind of gratuitous blow-em-up kind of action that you would see in the 80s later in films like Rambo 2, and in slashers like Friday the 13th, which isn't a blow-em-up, but it still is very, gratuitous kind of banal violence, violence had kind of started to lose its meaning in the early 80s.
I guess I kind of see why you say that, because like when you do watch like 90s action flicks, like it really isn't about the violence. Like, I don't know how to articulate what I mean, but like violence was kind of just another tool of storytelling. Like, it was so there and expected that it wasn't the draw. Does that make sense?
It does, because it wasn't just that it was a storytelling tool. It was a particularly lazy one. Like, I remember as a high schooler doing summer camps to learn film craft at North Carolina School of the Arts, and one of my teachers, as a joke, had the quote-unquote rules of writing, and the number one that they had was, if you can't resolve a situation, kill a character. So it was always, in my mind, a very weak choice to just use violence for the sake of violence. And the best directors of the 80s to employ it as a technique hit at that and understood that violence in of itself needed to be satirized and needed to be not glorified, but kind of reviled in the way that it was portrayed and the way that it was made banal on the screen. So enter, in 1983, David Cronenberg with Videodrome, and in 1987, Paul Verhoeven with RoboCop. Two films that absolutely floored people with their graphic displays of violence, but in both films, the violence has an extraordinarily important critical point.
Oh, 100%. I also, am I wrong? But didn't the RoboCop guy have something to do with this movie, or am I tripping?
Yeah, that's Paul Verhoeven. That's your director for Total Recall.
Okay, thank you. I said, wait a second. Did you just say the director of this movie? Like, I'm confused.
Well, no, I'm glad we got there, because that's just one of the many strains of history that kind of leads into how this project happens. Is that, yes, there is a whole pre-production story that we are going to get into in a little bit, folks, but at its outset, in terms of the way it's thematically structured, the way that violence is an absolute integral part of the story of Total Recall, it's because Paul Verhoeven understood violence and understood how to employ it effectively on film. It's not about making people feel an act of violence is overly dramatized. It's not, Rambo shooting a grenade-tipped arrow and blowing somebody to smithereens. That's, you see that once or twice, it becomes pretty boring on its own.
Mm-hmm.
But if you see, these guys in Total Recall, these agents just mow down a group of mutants or mow down a group of civilians because it's convenient to their mission, just the way that they just do not care about the people around them. Suddenly, that violence has a new and horrifying edge to it, where you understand the concept that's being satirized here, state authoritarian violence. You understand the banality of the way that the state treats that, and it means you have to confront it as an intellectual concept.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because, really, I think a lot of people see Arnold, our mans, and they think not plot heavy. But, I have genuinely found a new appreciation for him and his work, and specifically in Total Recall, because Total Recall was the intellectual action flick. And I feel like that's what the director really wanted to do with this, especially with the criticism of RoboCop. So I'm trying to figure out how a story like this gets made. Jack, let's get into it. Where are the threads of this story? Did this man's wake up one morning from a dream and said, yes, what if my memories could be implanted and I have a story and Arnold is going to be in it?
Well, I mean, aside from Arnold being in it, that's how Jacob's Ladder happened. Different film. This happened because Hollywood writer Ronald Shusett in 1974 happened to be going through a science fiction periodical. And he discovered at the time, this is not what I think of him, but he was this at the time, quote-unquote hack writer Philip K. Dick's story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, a 23-page short story about somebody who wanted to have a vacation implanted in their head of them being a secret agent. Only when that implantation happens, it discovers that they actually were already a pre-programmed agent, and this was blowing their cover, and if this agent died, there would be an alien invasion. So it was classic Philip K. Dick in the way that it was constructed and the way that it played with the idea of reality and the perception of reality. And Shusett jumped at it right away. He thought it was a good property, and he brought in his good buddy Dan O'Bannon to work on it. And BK, the first act was like that. It just went in a pinch.
I guess you must really have been passionate about an idea like that when the story just writes itself.
I mean, it did. And even in the mid-'70s when the script was coming together, people said it was one of the best first halves of a script that they had ever read. So it was something that was highly regarded while it was in the earliest stages of production.
But first half, I was sorry, but I'm trying to figure out. First half, were they not happy with the end?
It wasn't that they weren't happy with the end. It's that they just couldn't get to the end, period. It took them a year to get from Recall and Quaid being pursued to get to Mars. The whole set piece of Mars was the second act that they had to add on.
Okay.
But, BK, that was a year. 3 to 4 years later, they still don't have an ending.
Oh no.
It got to the point where Shusett and O'Brien just sort of had to drop the project for a little bit because they went to go work on a little film called Alien. So that was taking up their time for a little bit, but it was a project that they always wanted to come back to and work on again.
Okay, I mean, with a story so awesome, like when you have an idea that again writes itself, at least that solid half of an idea, that's not a project you're gonna drop. That's not a project you're gonna forget about. So what happened to make them revisit it?
I mean, once they got done, Shusett had a production deal very briefly with Disney. So this weirdly almost became a Disney release at its early stages.
Odd.
Very odd. But at the end of the day, after bouncing around for a little bit, and despite the fact that it didn't have a really suitable ending, it ended up in the hands of 80s mega producer Dino De Laurentiis, who is responsible for producing a couple of films that you might have heard of, BK, like the cult horror film Maximum Overdrive by Stephen King.
Okay.
Manhunter, the original Hannibal Lecter film.
Wow. All right. Okay.
The David Lynch classic Blue Velvet. And this one I know you're going to be happy about is he's the guy who's responsible for producing and releasing Evil Dead 2.
Oh, everybody's favorite.
You just don't like the fact that that film was remade and it was done extremely different discussion, Jack. Different discussion.
Save it for a different episode.
I know, Lord knows we have enough in this one. So it falls into the hands of De Laurentiis, and he, pitches it to a couple of directors and eventually settles on, upon his success from Videodrome, David Cronenberg, who becomes the first guy to really develop this project and to start adding concepts into this script where, basically the guy has gone to recall, he's this secret agent memory triggered now, and he's on Mars. What do you do with him? So that's where Cronenberg comes in.
Okay, well, I'm liking the story here. I'm trying to reenact myself as being in the writer, and I'm like, okay, cool, secret agent memory activated. Oh no, what do we do? What is dreams? What is reality? Let's go to Mars. I'm trying to see that leap, and I guess my question is how did we work this into the world building? Because the state of the world in Total Recall is very much hinging upon extreme totalitarian capitalism and a insane existence of people living on another planet. I need to know that leap. How do we get there?
Well, it really does start with Cronenberg, although he had a very different vision for the film. He wanted it to be a sort of Manchurian Candidate style film. And so he added a lot of political intrigue about the ruling of Earth and Mars into it. But he's the guy that adds the political thriller aspects.
Okay.
And ultimately, that wasn't at the time what De Laurentiis or Shusett actually wanted from the property, and they had multiple arguments with Cronenberg on it that would end up getting him to leave the project, because while Cronenberg wanted to do this tight political thriller, De Laurentiis was interested in doing, as he called it, Raiders of the Lost Ark on Mars.
What in tarnation?
Well, and it also didn't help that the chosen star for the film at the time, Richard Dreyfuss, was also giving creative input to have the character of Quaid rewritten to be more the kind of everyman that Dreyfuss was playing in his films at the time. So this was a very, very different project in Cronenberg's hands. And while that didn't happen, I will say this, BK, he did leave us with one indelible mark upon this film that will always be his, and that is the mutants.
Wow. Okay. So I guess in his brainchild of, thinking about the state of the world and the affairs in his political drama, he said, okay, well, how are the people affected on this planet?
That was really it. He was looking at it in a more macro level. He was looking at it as though Arnold was the former leader of Earth who had to be brainwashed and hidden on Mars, but it turned out that he was actually just a low-level government worker who had been tricked into thinking he was the president already, and he kills Cohagen so that he can become ruler of Earth.
Whoa. What the heck?
Way more high concept than what we ended up with. Very high concept in its execution.
This sounds like a video game, man.
It does, doesn't it?
Oh my goodness. Okay.
But Cronenberg's off the project at the end of '84, and it was in this 3-year period that Shusett and O'Bannon finally settle upon the third act idea. What if there is air on Mars to be provided through this alien device. And what if our hero's goal and objective is to start this device, and essentially save the day, save Mars, be the savior of the planet, which is a far more satisfying ending when you think about it in pure Hollywood terms of seeing your hero conquer. You know, why rule when you can be the savior?
Oh, for sure. I mean, and it's just I don't know, for me, being the grand hero of the day to save not, one person, but a society of people, like what bigger gesture could you do as an action hero, right? Like the action hero doesn't become the leader of the free world, okay? No, he does his stuff and then he leaves, okay? And lives happily ever after.
100%. And that was the direction that director Richard Rush wanted to go with. There was just one problem. Dino De Laurentiis hated the air on Mars ending.
What did he hate about it? It's a beautiful high concept. I mean, think about it. If alien device existed, that would make sense. A terraforming society, they explore planets. It makes the world even more sci-fi and believable. Also, it also justifies like the capitalization and commoditization of oxygen. I love it. How did he not like it?
First off, I think Richard Rush would have been very happy to have you in the room with him while this argument was going on, BK.
I'm just saying, it's true.
But secondly, what it was is that De Laurentiis couldn't visualize it. He couldn't envision what that climax was going to look like as a satisfying end to the film. And Richard Rush thought it was beautiful, and they argued it over the point until Richard Rush ended up being fired.
Wow.
And Shusett almost walked away from it as well, because De Laurentiis was even considering taking Mars out of the picture.
What? Oh my gosh.
And the guy who really comes in here and saves it is director Bruce Beresford, who at the time would have been best known for doing the film Breaker Morant in 1980. So De Laurentiis was being challenged at this time by Shusett about the air on Mars ending and told him basically, you know what, show any other director this and they're going to tell you that it's a good ending. And so the first director that De Laurentiis shows it to is Bruce Beresford. And Beresford told De Laurentiis point blank that he was, and I quote, full of shit. And Beresford, after that point, talks De Laurentiis into the air on Mars version of the script. And De Laurentiis says, okay, Ron, let's go. We are on. Let's do the film. So production gets started. Patrick Swayze is your lead as Quaid. And we are...
Patrick Swayze?
Patrick Swayze. That's exactly right. And BK, we are headed with this production, having sunk $3 million into pre-production and $5 million in production. We are headed to Australia for filming. And we are underway.
$3 million? That's wild. That is insane.
That's just the start.
That's what I was about to say, because I watched some of the documentaries and stuff like that. I've done a little bit of research, and I thought they didn't film in Australia. I thought they filmed in Mexico. So what the heck is happening there?
Well, what happens is this film is going on. It's underway. Bruce Beresford is your director. Patrick Swayze is your star. Dino De Laurentiis is your producer, except he's not your producer anymore because he and his company just went bankrupt in 1980.
Ooh.
Ronald Shusett is given a call during production by Beresford and told point blank, Dino has just gone bankrupt. He just fired about 80 people. I am watching the sets be bulldozed outside my window.
Oh my God.
So in 1988, guys, yes, this film comes out in 1990, but in 1988, this film is dead. Total Recall is not happening ever. De Laurentiis has the film in bankruptcy. Nobody's going to be able to get a hold of it because it's in bankruptcy. Film is dead.
But we clearly watched a movie at the watch party yesterday, so Jack, help me out here.
Well, this is where one very important actor, and I think you know his name.
Is this where my boy comes in? Is this where my boy Arnold comes in with the swoop de whoop?
And that's the piece that you know, BK, is that Arnold does swoop in here.
Yes, Arnold actually does come in here. I was surprised that. I didn't realize that happened, that they went bankrupt, that it was that bad. All I knew is that I thought it was the rights to the film. I didn't realize that the film was already starting, sets being made, miniatures happening, and Arnold's like, all right, let me grab this movie right quick for the one time. I like this movie. This is mad good. Let me see if I can get my hands on this.
And BK, while it's always good to hype up Arnold Schwarzenegger for a good action film, the piece you don't know is who he got to be the money behind that acquisition. Is he went to the producers Mario Kassar and Andrew Vina, who ran a little picture company called Carolco Pictures, which was the studio that defined the action film in the 1980s. And Arnold's becoming a superstar, and Carolco becoming one of the hottest production houses in Hollywood from the early 80s to Total Recall are very interesting parallel journeys.
That's crazy. I want to be that type of person, man. I mean, this is like peak Arnold. Like, if Arnold shows up and goes, bro, I'm gonna need you to do XYZ, you do it. Like, you don't say no, you say how much, and you make it happen.
But that wasn't the case until very late into the 80s, BK.
Really?
Arnold started out as a bodybuilder and is kind of a bit player in the acting roles that he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
It was really only Conan the Barbarian in 1982 that turned him into a star. Not a megastar yet, mind you, but just a star. And so Arnold had that leading man starring charisma about him and was considered that in Hollywood for, the early 80s, definitely had that down, but he wasn't considered the bank until 1985 rolls around and a little film called Commando comes out.
Ooh, so Terminator didn't do it for him?
Terminator got his name out there, but it was kind of a cult classic before it truly exploded. The film that really made him that megastar, we can put him in any action film, was Commando.
Okay.
And then following that up in 1987 to cement his status with Predator.
Okay. I see what you mean, though. Yeah. Terminator's definitely more of like a character type role, not the action hero you're looking for. So that's crazy. Okay.
So 87 is when he gets his clout. And around that same time is when Carolco was kind of at the height of their powers. See, they start their story back in 1981, around the same time Arnold was starting to come to prominence. They were originally an international sales agent, which is a company in Hollywood that goes out and negotiates who's going to get to buy the international distribution rights to a film in order to guarantee a couple of millions that are then applied directly to the budget of a film so that it can be made. It's a financing trick that has been as old as Hollywood.
Okay.
But they were getting upset with that by the end of 81 because of the fact that they were taking all the risk of distributing these films. The studios liked the fact they got the pre-sales from them, but when the films performed poorly overseas, it was Carolco's name that got smeared because it was their name on the deal. And so they decided, you know what, we're going to start needing to take a chance on actually producing some films of our own, and we need to, use our sales acumen to guarantee that those can be profits. And that's when a very troubled script falls into their laps called First Blood.
First Blood? What is that?
BK, that is also known as the original Rambo film.
Oh, snap. Okay.
And so in 1982, they produced this very small but very visceral action film about the horrors of post-traumatic stress disorder. And because of the fact that they sold the distribution rights, the video rights, and the cable rights separately overseas, the film was a guaranteed profit before it even opened, and it was a smash hit that put the studio on the map, put Stallone on the map, and really, it, along with its follow-up in 85 by Carolco, Rambo 2, created the G.I. Joe 80s action star image. Stallone was the guy that shaped that, and that's what Arnold was trying to shape himself as in the late 80s. It was Stallone who led the way.
Wow, that's awesome. And that makes a lot of sense, too, like when you think about it. I haven't watched too many action films, but I have seen some of the ones you've mentioned today, and I'm like, all right, well, now that you're talking about it and the more you're saying it, I kind of get that vibe from Quaid, the main character in Total Recall, but there's something really unique that I feel like Arnold brings to the character. And quite frankly, the entire cast of this film. So I kind of want to get to how we build the characters. How do we get to build this story? What does it visually look like? Because on paper, it's sounding like we have money after money after money, and like top studios, top people. I even know that some of the like even the practical effects teams, the CGI were like best in the business. So like they were sparing no chops to get this to happen. So what about this work made them risk it all?
Well, BK, a couple of things. One, they had already done the film Red Heat in 1988 with Arnold Schwarzenegger and wanted to form a relationship with him because they saw him coming up as a megastar. But more broadly, after Rambo 2 came out, Carolco in the late 80s was going through a string of high-budget, critical successes, but massive commercial failures. This was when Angel Heart, the Mickey Rourke, Lisa Bonet, Robert De Niro horror film, came out, which is nowadays known more for its sex scenes than for how good it was on release. It was also the time when Extreme Prejudice came out, the Walter Hill Western starring Nick Nolte, another critically amazing film that just has never seen the light of day outside of the 80s. And most crucially, they had just finished production on Rambo 3, which is, a poorly aged film because, first off, he's allied with the Taliban in that one, but it was also the biggest, most expensive film of the time at that time. And so Carolco, coming up empty and coming up short on all of these, they needed a hit, and they needed a big hit. So they went to Arnold, and Arnold said, if you will pay $3 million to get this script out of bankruptcy from Dino De Laurentiis, this is the film that we do. And they decided, okay, you know what, Arnold? We're buying the film. Let's go.
Wow. That's, oh, man. I mean, and what a buy. Like, what? Oh, because, like, when I watch it as a fan of the film, I love it. I think it's awesome. But, like, to put yourself at the beginning, or like at the, not the beginning, but to put yourself at this time when the film has come out, and for its time, this film really did something quite magical. I don't really know where to begin because there is so much awesomeness about this when we get into like the nitty-gritty of actual production. So I want to lead on you, Jack. Where do you want to intro to this? How do we get on set? What does that look like?
I mean, I think one of the really good through lines to getting to the set is the fact that Arnold really acted on this film as an executive producer in every sense but title. He was there to collaborate with Verhoeven consistently. He was there to help them look for the image of the film and to help them brainstorm. But ultimately, the way we end up in Mexico City is because Verhoeven, throughout the artistic process of this film, was looking for a very kind of alien style of architecture. And he seized upon Mexico City, not just because it's a effective place in terms of money to make a production. He went there because the architecture of Mexico City is in large form in the new brutalism style. So a lot of what you're seeing on screen, a lot of the imagery, a lot of where they chose to go, it's because of the look and feel. Those were not sets you see Quaid running through. That was all locations.
Oh, that's awesome. And the architecture is so cool. Like, I know some of the scenes that you're talking about are like the city scenes, like in the subway where it's all these like gray concrete vibes. And it really does set the tone for a futuristic society, especially with like the costuming and the types of props that they have, the guns. Like everything does look like a reality that is not too outside of the realm of believable, but definitely something in the future, something not in the norm, something that we will get to. And I feel like that continues as we move from Earth to Mars with the designs there. And I think those were actual sets. Am I right?
I'll just preface it here. The most super massive at the time modeling and miniaturing work that had ever been done on a film.
Period. And miniature work, for anyone who is curious, I know a lot of people might not have a an older film as reference, but lots of the stuff you see, like my big go-to is to talk about Star Wars when it comes to miniatures and things like that because it's so iconic. But these are entire little mini sets, bro. Like when I tell you, like people who play with like model trains and that type of stuff, like that on crack, like on steroids. Like when you see the size of these, like, and I need y'all to go look it up, and of course we'll post it like on our social media so you can actually like, you know, get an idea of the gravity and the scale of these miniaturized sets. But they do this so that they can get the angles and kind of create a world that you can't do back in the day without, you know, actually making it. Like there wasn't CGI like that.
Quantify the size of these. I know a number is kind of meaningless when it gets a little large, but this was 20,000 square feet of miniatures were constructed for this film. 9 sound stages were filled in order for these miniatures to be on set. And I stressed this when we went to the watch party, but I think it's worth repeating here on the podcast. There is only one shot in this film that is CGI. Visually, the aesthetic of this film was created practically in 99.9% of the cases, which I just find to be a marvel.
No, it is quite phenomenal. And as a big fan of practical effects and things like that, I love this film for this very reason. So like, this is where like I get super, super excited because they went off. They did not hold back. And even when they ran into issues, when I tell you they finessed things with the utmost class to make what I think is quite literally a testament and a work of art, from the mutants to the sets to, I mean, from the CGI, you're saying at the time, there really wasn't a thing like that. Mocap wasn't as good as it is now, not nearly as good. And I know they even ran into trouble trying to capture that scene itself. I don't know if you dived into that as well, Jack.
I got into it a little bit when it comes to the... we're talking about the one CGI shot in the film.
Correct.
Which is when Quaid goes through the X-ray security, and you see the gun that's on him, and he jumps through the glass. And that shot, I know that they did have some trouble with that, but BK, I know you're kind of our visual effects expert here on the podcast, so I would love to hear your explanation of it.
Oh yeah, it's a funny story that happened, but they really needed to like mocap Arnold and all the people that walked by, but specifically Arnold because he has those fight kind of sequence, like it's more dramatic movements than like the rest of the people walking by. And when they went to record it, pretty much all the footage that they got from like the dots, from what we know when you place those markers on your body and they pick you up, it wasn't usable. So they had to pretty much finesse the animations from lining it up with the camera footage, like the actual footage itself, and pretty much hand make all of the frames and all of the skeletons in that. It turned out to be something crazy, to the point where the effects artists were so passionate about it, they needed a final pass over the animation when it finally came together with the footage, and they were going to put out their own money to get that final polish on it. And their department lady was like, all right, hold on, let me go back and talk to them, because the fact that y'all are this invested in this scene to make it be as cutting edge and as perfect and believable as it should be motivated them to get the extra budget to get that final pass to see what you see on the screen. It is awesome. And the funniest part about the story is they had to fight to get their names fully credited. Their company got credited, but not their own names. So, little tidbit, in the theatrical cut, it will say only one company that did the effects. But in the home video one, you can actually see all of the cast that was there that helped make that CGI, that groundbreaking CGI possible. So they did get their credits due with what they were able to pull off. And it was quite literally almost impossible. The footage they got only worked because Arnold happened to be wearing a white shirt instead of a black shirt like he was supposed to be.
It's an absolute journey just to get to one shot. When you think about how much CG work and what is expected of visual effects artists today, it's truly monumental to think about. But I want to put one part of that in context, just sort of, from a practical filmmaking standpoint. This film was not edited on a computer. So when we're talking about getting an optical print of the CG effect, what that means is that this effect had to be printed onto its own negative and then extremely delicately layered on other layers of celluloid, the actual print of the film, in order to be put into the print effectively for the final creation of the prints that go to the theaters. So this was a painstaking process that in 1990, with CG basically being in its nascence, this had to be done as delicately as possible to get it right. And you watch the final product today, I don't know about you, BK, yes, it's unrefined, but it looks pretty seamless to me.
Oh, I think throwing that polish aside, because it does seem dated when you look at it, but when you see the flow of the animation and how perfectly lined up it is with the actors, and that the weight of the animation of the walking and the movements feel realistic, I think that's what's phenomenal to me, is the accuracy of those motions that were almost quite literally hand drawn.
Now, I loved diving into that CG shot a little bit, but BK, one guy that I want to talk about on this film, who I know that you've done a deep dive on in your own research, is I want to talk about special effects makeup artist Rob Bottin, because he's the guy that created the mutants. He had that pre-existing relationship with Paul Verhoeven from working with him on RoboCop, and he, as much as anybody, really created the visual aesthetic of the characters in this film. So just like how did he go about that? Like, what did he do to create some of the puppets on this? The woman's head, Cueto. Like, how did he do it?
I think it's really cool because, like, Bottin, he pretty much got to have as much fun as he wanted designing the mutants. They were pretty much like, do whatever you want. He's like, whatever I want. Really? Okay. So when I tell you he went off, but he had a really cool vision of trying to retain like this realism, but being able to kind of send it into a alternate reality. So it was believable but unbelievable. And I think that was like the direction from their design. And I love that because when you see some of these models and when you see the effects that happen from some of the animatronics and some of the prosthetics there, it really does create that sense of like disassociation. Like, could this actually be possible?
Beautiful work, which seems like a weird thing to say about puppetry that is designed to seem so grotesque. I mean, the mutants are portrayed to be grotesque because they are meant to be treated by the authoritarians in this film as subhuman. They are the people on Mars being discriminated against and taken advantage of by this dictatorial system that Verhoeven described as trying to get the most out of something with the least effort.
Yeah, and it's also directly correlated to the main plot as well. I mean, the very lack of oxygen in this world is pretty much the cause of the mutation. The Mars air, whatever it is causing these, body dysmorphia to happen, really. And Bowden really liked the idea of like a monstrous like concept. Like, he really wanted to kind of make something creepy. And his original design of Kato, I don't know if you know this, Jack, but like he was supposed to have a small person grow out of like their head.
Ooh.
Not on the stomach.
I would just say a prayer for the poor actor that would have to hold that puppet mold up with the weight of their own neck. I can kind of see how that didn't get carried off.
Oh, yeah, no. And it wasn't even just practicality. It was honestly, the design was just too monstrous. Like, they wanted it to be more believable and a little bit more unsettling. So the angle for Kato, the rebel leader, I guess we could call him, he leaned more towards an intelligent baby, was really the design. And when you see this,
I can see that.
Man, baby is definitely where we went for. But Kato is actually a full body prosthetic that could be physically worn by Belle. It is from the chin down to the waist in a weird harness. It's super crazy, but it takes 15 puppeteers to operate the arms and the head of this intelligent baby.
I was just going to say, Bell, of course, is Marshall Bell, who played Cueto. He was the actor who was cast as George, and because he was dissatisfied with the fact that he thought it was going to be a bigger, more important role, because he did not know initially the relationship to Cueto, Verhoeven decided, okay, you're the voice of Cueto. So he did both roles.
100%. I always mix up the actors' names with the characters' names, so I'm really glad you clarified that, because this man's, when I tell you, like, Bell had to spend 9 hours in makeup on his first day of filming the process.
9 hours?
9 hours. They got it shorter a little bit, but Mans thought it was too exhausting. He's like, bro, I can't keep doing this. He couldn't go to the bathroom in the apparatus, so they had to like give him a special hole. Like, it was rough. Like, to the point where they were like, you know what? Let's make an animatronic Bell, which they did.
You're kidding.
So there are certain scenes, so including the reveal and when Arnold is holding the baby's hands, that is Bell himself. But all the other scenes will start in post with an animatronic Bell. And it was so good. Verhoeven did not tell the difference straight up. He was like, I don't know how I feel about this at first, and was like, you know what, let me trust my visual effects guy, let me trust him. Came in, watched the test footage, and was like, all right, you can have that.
I kind of love that ingenuity, especially because effects makeup is some of the most difficult stuff for an actor to deal with. Just another example from this film, the actress Leisha Naff, who played the three-breasted prostitute, even though she had artificial breasts the entire time, it was a very painful weight upon her. And also, just from a psychological standpoint, she felt very exposed because of what the modeling she had on was. So it was a very nerve-wracking performance for a lot of the people who were stuck in this makeup. A full credit to these actors for putting up with the various mental and physical strains that go into creating these images. It's difficult.
Oh, 100%. And with a full body harnessed like that, and so many layers of prosthetics that need to be operated, I would be like, Bell, I'm like, good, get me out of that thing. And so they replaced it with a mechanical person, a animatronic, and that had to be operated by other people. And they even had like simulated breathing, because you see how heavy he's breathing when like Quato takes over. Like, it is so crazy when you go back and watch those scenes and think about every minute detail that is moving with that puppet is some sort of either person or computer controlled remote control that is being manually operated to the speech, to the performance. They had to be so precise in recording each of this stuff. They had to do it at the same time. I could not imagine being on set like that, but to see it all together must have made it worth it, let me tell you, because it is so good. It holds up.
It does hold up, but, you know, it has to be a case in a lot of ways of product over process, because it was a difficult shoot for people. Like, you mentioned that this took 15 puppeteers to operate Cueto. Part of me says, half in jest, was that because it needed 15 people on the puppet at once, or is that because some of the puppeteers were sick at the time? Because, BK, you're shooting in Mexico, the water quality is not great, the food quality is not great. Literally everybody on set, except for Arnold Schwarzenegger and writer Ronald Shusett, got sick.
I mean, it happens when you're shooting internationally, but like, I heard that Arnold didn't get sick because he had a personal chef. Is that true?
That's true. And add to that, Ronald Shusett didn't get sick because he insisted on taking vitamin B12 shots.
Random. He must have had the inside scoop, let me tell you.
You know, he knew about those supplementation scams before it was cool. But yeah, it was a tough shoot. I will absolutely say that, you know, people got injured. Michael Ironside busted his sternum.
Oof.
There were broken fingers on Arnold. He got his arm cut open when he punched the glass on the train, and a squib didn't go off to blow up the glass. So he had to use a coat to cover up the cut in a lot of the filming. Ironside's injury, actually, because of the fact that they filmed everything in sequence, which is extremely rare, they had to delay filming for several weeks because of Ironside's injury. If you're wondering how the film ballooned from a $30 million budget to a $60 million budget because of overruns and because of difficulties, this is some of the stuff that caused it.
That's wild. I know that there was a lot of people who did quite a bit of their own stunt work. I mean, shout out to our ladies in this film. The characters Lori and Melina, they really did pretty much all of their own choreography, and I feel like that's so cool to kind of shine a light on that and see how great they are. There was really not a second guess that they were the girls when they auditioned, and I kind of quite really love the ladies in this film. I think they're both strong characters as a character and as actresses on set. They definitely did not get intimidated by working with someone, as famous as Arnold and the rest of the cast. I mean, it is a great cast.
I mean, it really is, and there was a lot of kinship between them. They all really liked each other as people. Rachel Tickerton and Sharon Stone, they got onto the film as those two actresses very early on. They, as you said, Verhoeven just knew that they were right for the part, and they were largely just treated as some of the guys. But at the same time, Sharon Stone talks very fondly about the way that Michael Ironside and her related. He was always very sweet to her. If she had a take where she would, bust her ass on a stunt or anything like that, he'd be one of the first people there to pick her up. And at the same time, Arnold was involved in a very sweet act of helping Michael Ironside at the time, because he discovered that Ironside's sister at the time was very, very ill. And at a time when cell phones and, international connections over, wireless were not ubiquitous, he was letting Michael Ironside borrow his phone to talk to his sister on a weekly basis. And then Ironside finds out after the film that Schwarzenegger had also been calling her to make sure that she was doing okay.
Aww.
So there was a lot of love and a lot of sweetness here, which is interesting because Verhoeven has a reputation for, I'll just say it bluntly, he has a reputation for being an asshole on set, for being a difficult director to work with.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very joyous production because it was so physical, and Verhoeven proved himself willing to be expressive and to get into the physicality. He would throw himself into the positions that Arnold or Sharon would have to be thrown into. He would, get active in the way that he would explain the fight choreography. And he wanted people to be active with him. And so you can sense a lot of how the energy came together with just a group of people who really liked each other and a group that had a true energy about getting this product over the finish line.
I mean, I have to say that it's really awesome to hear that because, we do talk about a lot of horror stories, and then we do talk about stories like this where the team does come together and you create some of the most beautiful, memorable moments there where I feel like when that energy is so right. So I do have to say, before we finish our story here, I got to talk about my favorite scene and my, I guess relationship with this film. So Total Recall, it's not even the film, it's the genre. I love science and I love sci-fi. I love the future, and I love dystopias. So I don't know about you, Jack. I think we might have similar taste in genre loves.
Well, we do, but please continue. I was just saying, I think we might have very similar but slightly different reasons for enjoying this.
But I love it so much, from the dedication, like we've talked about, to the work, I guess, from conception to actualization. But I think what really resonated with me is the fat lady scene, and not just the practical effects from it. It's literally called the fat lady scene. Let's actually give the actress her credit, Priscilla Allen, who was picked for this.
Absolutely.
I loved seeing the acting, the overacting done so well into a practical effects situation. That transformation was just by far one of the most blowing things I think I've really ever seen in film, to be honest. Someone who loves those aspects of filmmaking. And when I tell you, I loved it when I saw it, But when I found out what needed to be done to create it, I love her. I love it. I love them. I say it as in the mechanics that were made and the animatronic that was used. It is just such a funny story, and I think that that's really what got me into it. And I kind of wanted to share it with you, Jack, unless you knew already.
No, please share it, because I'll be honest, in this rabbit hole that I've been in of doing research, the one thing I can't track down, I don't know how you did, is the story of how they made that. Because I know it's not CGI, I know it's not computer effects, but I'm sitting here doing my research like, how the hell did they do that?
I'm actually excited to geek out about it. So like the big thing that I think starts this story is finding out that it was going to be kind of really hard to find a woman or an actress that is like large enough to believe that Arnold is inside her. So they were really looking for someone with the right frame, and they started with like wrestlers and bodybuilders were all considered before they found Miss Allen here. But even despite her frame, her head was actually still too small to genuinely fit over Arnold.
You're kidding.
So all the masks, they had to make a bunch of masks and casts of her head to create the mask is what they call it. It still wasn't big enough, and they kept making it bigger and bigger, and it still wasn't big enough to cover Arnold's head. It was so large. They were like, what is going on? And then they made it bigger because it wasn't big enough for the mechanics to open it up on camera. So they had to make it even bigger.
That's just absolutely wild.
So to the point where there were 4 heads were built, and the masks are cut into different sections with custom blades to make the separation like possible. But here's the thing, Jack. After a few days, the plastic kind of warped.
Ooh.
And then they reconstructed it from fiberglass, cut the pieces, still warped, reinforced it with steel coated and laminated resin before the head was cut, and then it still warped.
Let it never be said that Coralco Pictures would not throw obscene amounts of money to get things right.
So this lightweight mask, it was supposed to be just like a mask that he could put on him, right? A mask he could take off, became 20 pounds a piece of metal.
Wow.
So they said, yeah, we can't put that on our homeboy Arnold. We can't actually do that. So they created a mechanical animatronic Arnold for that scene.
What?
Yes, the scene where the face and the mask opens up and and underneath it, just for that one scene there with the head holding it up, the arms go up, that is in a mechanical Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was controlled by an operator with like a push-pull system for each like slice of the head, and then children's clay filled in the gaps in the starting position so that they would open up seamlessly. Like, this was a work of art, Jack. Like, that is why I love this film, is that scene. 2 weeks. I tell you, it was definitely more than 2 weeks to figure out how to make that scene work.
I tell you, that's unbelievable. I had no idea. I mean, in a film full of ordeals, that's a pretty marquee one. I know you love the quote 2 weeks. I still am very partial to you think this is the real Quaid it is. But I love that the technical aspects of this film are what the draw are for you, and I like the way that you recognize how integral they are to the storytelling, and there's a real achievement in that. But for my part, what I like about this, and what I've always liked about Verhoeven, is I think his social commentary is very salient. Now, my favorite Verhoeven film is Starship Troopers, because I think it's just the funniest, like, most tongue-in-cheek lampoon of fascism that's ever been created, and I have a ball watching it. But I think where Total Recall is a little bit different and a little bit more cerebral is that it approaches that authority as, you know, ironclad and as just sort of faceless and banal and just everyday and common in a way that makes the violence of the regime stand out in ways that make it an effective story. It's action movies, which are like 90s action movies especially, are my bread and butter on what I grew up on. It is an absolutely perfect action film in the respect that its action and the way that it moves through the film is motivated by the story that's being told and makes you want to root for the changes that you as the audience want to see in the world. You're invested in this hero's journey, and the visual effects, the smart writing, the smart pacing of this, everything that was done to make this film seem believable, it all folds in to a really truly stunning and strong statement of sci-fi that has turned out to be relatively timeless. But I mean, those are my reasons, BK. But I have to ask you a question, because it would not be fair to our listeners if we didn't discuss this for a few minutes, BK. Was Total Recall real, or was it all a dream? Does he save the day? Does he save the day, or is he lobotomized?
Oh my gosh. Well, a fade to white usually means a fade to hope. I mean, in Greece, do they all die and go to heaven? Like, what's happening here? Okay, I'm gonna be honest though. I genuinely think I think it happened. I am someone who thinks it happened. I think it could be all a dream though. It's hard. I think the ambiguity of the ending really sets out for something awesome to be seen. And when you watch it again, from the beginning, there's certain acting takes and beats that happen which make you, even at the beginning, feel like something's just not quite right, that something's too good to be true. I mean, even casting Arnold as this role to be this person who has a new identity, he looks too buff and swole to just be this everyday man guy. I mean, in juxtaposition with the other guy in his, like, you know, day job mining, like, the builds don't line up. None of it makes sense. So it's kind of hard to tell if it's real or if it's just a dream. But I'm a fan of believing that it happened. I really enjoy that. And let me tell you, Jack, the remake does not make that answer any easier. If you haven't seen it, I definitely suggest you check it out. It is worth the watch. It is a very good, I think, contemporary take on the source material, telling a really awesome story, but still paying a solid homage to the original. 100% I will vouch for the Total Recall remake.
I have not been able to bring myself to watch it because I think I just have too much affection for Verhoeven's work, but I might give it a chance. But
we might have to make that happen in the future. I'm thinking maybe a watch party of sorts.
Maybe, but I will say this, BK, is I think, honestly, you and I are on opposite sides here, because I'm inclined to think it's a dream.
Really? Okay, all right.
And it'll let me bring one scene that is probably my favorite scene in the film I can talk about because of this. And I can also talk about Jerry Goldsmith's score, which we have not given enough credit to.
Oh, 100%.
It's the scene where Arnold is in the hotel room talking to Dr. Edgemar, the so-called psychologist from Total Recall, and his wife also shows up, Sharon Stone's character. I tend to think it's a dream because in that sequence, the film really kind of grinds to a halt, and it becomes a very purposeful discussion of where he would genuinely be mentally. And moreover, after he kills Dr. Edgemar, the path that Edgemar says he's going to go on is the path that happens. But it's not just his explanation that sells me. It's Sharon Stone's acting in that scene. Because she's very sedate and very much the loving wife you meet at the beginning of the film. You know, all of the secret agent stuff is stripped away from her, and she's just a loving wife. But the moment Edgemar takes the bullet to the head, she just goes, "Now you've done it, now you've done it." And she ramps back up ever so slowly into the mold that he's been envisioning for her in this story. And so I always look at that and I'm like, he rejected reality. Like, like, it keeps me in mind of Cronenberg's Videodrome, where the longer the film goes, the more the world becomes Videodrome. That's kind of how I feel about Total Recall here. And so, to me, it's a dream. And the fact that Goldsmith throughout the film has these little flute hits, these little references in his cue points that point to the more dreamlike aspects of the film, and the fact that you hear those during the kiss and the fade to white, I'm not so sure, BK.
I like your take on that scene because, like, for me in that scene, I think what was so cool about it, and you are right, it is a turning point of the film. I really thought that it was them really trying to pull a number on him, like 100%. And I think that is exactly what they wanted with the storytelling. I mean, we want to root for Arnold. We don't want to think it's a dream. We want it to be real. And her acting from the beginning through the end of being able to kind of code switch and be like, I'm this hard killer, but I'm also your loving wife. For me, was just be like, man, she's really good at her job. She's not going to put this act down. So to think that that is just merely a, artificially added memories that when he went in there for the first time, none of this breakdown even happened. I love it. I love it. And I think that's what makes this film such an awesome film and something that will be talked about endlessly because even when you rewatch it, you can still go through those questions again and have those experiences to figure out, is it true, is it not? It's so good, Jack. I feel like we could talk about this all day. Like, I didn't even get to talk about the elevator arm scene. I'm guaranteed you didn't get to talk about the music score enough. Like, dude, we can't, there's too much to break down in this. I feel like we need like an extended cut, maybe some Twitter threads of something, because there's just too much to geek out about this movie.
I think I'm gonna have to write that 600-page book.
Oh man, hey, don't do that for free, okay, Jack?
I won't do it for free, but at the same time, there's just so much to this film. I mean, even as something I already had a fair amount of respect for, the way that it is just this hurricane that sucks in all of these forces around what was and what exemplified action film in the 80s and 90s, what, it meant for science fiction, the way it became this flashpoint for violence in film, and the way that that was part of the overriding cultural discussion upon its release. I mean, the way that it became one of the last true smash hits for Karalka. The film made $250 million worldwide. And actually, because of the way that they were borrowing money at the time, this would be the last time that they actually profited off of a film. As much money as they made on Terminator 2, as much money as they made on Basic Instinct, they didn't make money off of those films. So Total Recall was the last winner and the high watermark for Karalko. And in a lot of ways, it is a high watermark for an entire era of action and sci-fi filmmaking.
An era that literally is still seen to this day. I mean, some of the themes and the references, even the stylization of stuff in Total Recall. I mean, even in the remake, which kind of marries a Blade Runner and the original in its stylization, they are seen in video games today, in different forms of media. I mean, Altered Carbon. Like, there is so much to be taken and influenced from this. I mean, the reactor at the end looks just like the video game Control. So you're going to start to see those references the more you go back and you watch amazing films like these. This is a film that is in the history books, I might have to add. So I am so grateful we were able to check this film out on Revenge of the Film Nerds this time around. And I know we have so much more left still to say. So we'll have to save it around for when we get to doing some fun supplementary content. I know we have things in the works building up. But I have to give you the floor, Jack, for you to lay up what we're going to get into for the next episode, because we have an awesome film lined up that you've suggested.
I am so happy to be getting into this one. Lord knows I love my Hollywood fare, and we have covered some great, true Hollywood high watermarks. But I want to get into my artsy films a little bit this season. I want to get into those films that are hugely impactful socially, but maybe don't have the resonance to young generations. So we are going back to 1985, and we are staying in the sci-fi realm because it is time for us to watch Terry Gilliam's Brazil, the film that created the modern steampunk aesthetic and created a lot of the dystopian future imagery that we see in sci-fi to this day. So Total Recall is an impactful film. Get ready for another one in this genre.
Woo! I'm so excited. Yes, I didn't even know that. I just knew the name. You put it down. You said we got to watch it. I didn't know it was sci-fi. I'm so excited. Oh my goodness. I'm ready to buckle up. And I hope y'all are too, because we're going to be coming with you with more episodes weekly as best we can here as we get into our new season of Revenge of the Film Nerds. You can check us out on Twitter at RFN_podcast or on Instagram at Revenge of the Film Nerds. We are out there hanging out. We're revving up our content as we get back into the season, into the swing of things. And we're still hosting plenty of watch parties for specific titles. Now, not for this next episode, but coming up very soon, we'll be having a watch party. So make sure you're following us on Twitter to get that invite so you can join and hang out with us. We really, really love being able to share some of these films with y'all. So, Jack, I hope you had a good time for this episode. Did we get to at least some of the good bits you wanted to talk about? Because, like, you had 10 pages of notes. I feel like we didn't get there.
We got a lot of it. There's stuff that I didn't talk about with like Cronenberg's process and with Gary Goldman's rewrites, and there's like that. I need to stop. I need to be good.
Stop. Look. We'll have some Twitter threads going in here with some little tidbits and little awesome stuff we didn't get into. So if you think we missed something, or if you're itching to hear all the other stuff we didn't get a chance to talk about, don't worry. You'll be able to find it out there in the interwebs. Just make sure you're following us on socials, all right? I think that is it for us for today. Thank you for listening to us, and we hope to see you soon. Let us know if you want to cover anything special or any movies you want us to check out in future seasons. We'd love to hear your suggestions, so share that with us at RFN_podcast on Twitter. We'll see you around next time.
All right, take care, BK.
See you later, Jack.